Well, I feel like I have to take back everything I said about the writing of Star Trek Into Darkness. I mean, this movie, Man of Steel, and its script by David S. Goyer, it makes this movie look good. Wait, why do I own this?
Goodbye, my son. Our hopes and dreams travel with you.
He'll be an outcast. I'll kill him.
How? He'll be a god to them.
What if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended? What if a child aspired to something greater?
Man of Steel is the long-awaited new Superman movie directed by Zack Snyder and written by David S. Goyer. It was meant to replace this movie, but unfortunately, just like this movie, it sucks.
You're the answer, son. You're the answer to Are We Alone in the Universe?
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son.
The movie unfortunately stars Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Michael Shannon, Diane Lane, Kevin Costner, Lawrence Fishburne, and Russell Crowe.
And I have to believe that you were sent here for a reason. And even if it takes the rest of your life, you owe it to yourself to find out what that reason is.
How do you find someone who has spent a lifetime covering his tracks?
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
Now to begin with, I'll get into my thoughts on Superman in general, Superman as a character. I like Superman as a character. I'm not a huge fan of that many Superman comics, but it's mostly the thing that Superman, if you really get down to the core of it, is actually a very tragic character. Because, like, everyone likes to say that Superman's very wholesome, he's a little bit too good, a little bit too pure. But the thing is, he's doing that in the face of his entire species going extinct except for him. You know, he could have, grown up very bitter and very mean and basically be like a Zod figure towards humanity and towards life because of what happened to his planet. But because of the words of his two fathers, he took a righteous path, a noble path, and that's basically what I like about him. Not a huge fan of Superman. He's basically, he is the anti-Batman, and I just like that in the character. I like a character that has a very tragic past, that gets over that, or is good despite that. I like that in a character. I mostly like good characters, even though I'm a brittle bastard, but,
Yeah? Alright. Come on, you're clear! Come on!
I'm not a huge fan of the other Superman movies overall. I've seen them. I do like the first two, and they're good movies. 3 and 4, they deserve the reputations that they have. And Superman Returns, which is the only one I have on DVD, which is peculiar. I don't think Superman Returns is that bad of a movie. It definitely has a severe lack of action, and it doesn't know what it's trying to be as a movie, but I'm really interested in what Bryan Singer had planned after that movie, because mostly to me, it felt like a setup to like a series. And now comes the part where we get into the actual review. Oh boy.
Sis?
Firstly, Russell Crowe in this movie is actually pretty great, and the cast in this movie is great, but particularly Russell Crowe does a fantastic job in this movie. He really sold at least the first 20 minutes of this movie for me. I really actually like the first 20 minutes, because the first 20 minutes feels like a completely separate, like, fucking huge space opera that unfolds in 20 minutes about the death of Krypton and the coup of Zod, and it's great. This first 20-minute sequence is completely over the top and ridiculous, and it kind of numbs you to the rest of the movie. And luckily, because he's Jal-El and in the mythos of Superman, he comes back later in holograph form. He's pretty great throughout this movie. He feels mostly like the only actor who's really putting in a concerted effort here, and that's one of the big problems with this movie. There's a big kind of case of no one really gives a fuck going around in this movie. I have to say the visuals in this movie, at least for, let's say 70% of the time, are really good. It had that constant like snap zoom that they do in CGI sometimes. Like they started doing that in Attack of the Clones, and then they did that on Firefly, and then it's been in a bunch of other things. They kept doing that at really inappropriate times, which would just completely it just makes you go, whoa, what the fuck, why'd you do that? That really ruins a lot of the good visuals in this movie. Stop doing that, directors. Or do it right, or do it less, or just don't do it. Or just don't ruin a pretty shot by doing something like that, just by putting this jarring zoom in there for no reason. Especially because you completely lose your bearings on the visuals of the movie. And unless you haven't noticed, that's the thing that separates what a movie is to anything else. So it's kind of the most important element, so don't fuck up the visuals at least. Especially when they're good to begin with, don't fuck them up. You kind of have to admire this movie as you're watching it, because it really is a train wreck unfolding in front of you, and in pretty brilliant form. And I've heard some people say that it's bad to the point where you can kind of derive no enjoyment of it, and that is true for a good chunk of this movie. A good chunk of this movie could completely just be jettisoned, but the parts where this is really bad and really dumb, it like broadsides you with stupidity left, right, and center, like at turns you don't expect. And I think that is at least extremely entertaining, and you can derive a lot of something from this movie. I don't necessarily think it's enjoyment, but it's some sort of sick pleasure in watching a movie where this is a fucking disaster, basically. It's holy shit bad, basically. It's that holy shit bad factor where it's just a spectacle on a fascinating level, basically. And I'm getting impassioned about it. You can hear it in my voice. And it's not particularly because this movie made me particularly mad or made me particularly anything, really. And I'll get into that in a second. But this movie was fascinating, and I love fascinating train wrecks like this, and that's what I'm passionate about. Not particularly bad movies, but I'm passionate when a movie is this concoction of bad, this right equation of bad, as you could say. It's like that scene in A Serious Man, the dream, where it's the equation where you can never predict anything will ever happen at any one moment. It's basically that is the equation. And you have to do the precise levels to hit the movie on the right mark, and this movie does, because it's a perfect balance of not understanding the source material, somehow making a movie that is visually intense but dull as shit, and just a script with stupidity beyond like the fathoms of anyone's imagination. This movie, oh boy.
You believe your son is safe?
I
Now we get into the pad. Chiefly, it's the script. It's David S. Goyer's bullshit, doesn't know what it's doing, doesn't know what it wants to say, doesn't know where it's going script that completely derails this movie at every moment, because it's like a top-down problem with everything in this film. To begin with, there's no structure. It's constantly jumping around in the time frame and like the series of events, and you could really you could put everything out of order in this movie and it really wouldn't do anything. I don't think it would still feel the same. Not the last third, because that actually feels like something is like driving towards something, but at least the first, from the destruction of Krypton to, I don't know, when the army arrests Superman, yeah, that happens in this movie. You could rearrange this movie in any order to get to that point, and nothing would change. There's basically no narrative structure in this movie. That is curious because most of the dialogue, and by most I mean 98% of it, because there's like 2 or 3 one-liners here or there, and that was a thought I had that struck me in the last couple minutes of the film, that there was no humor to the film. It takes itself incredibly seriously. It's pretentious. Not pretentious, but portentous. Look it up. I couldn't believe it. I was beside myself because it's a comic book movie, and you would think by the nature of a comic book movie, it would be fun, but it's not. And the majority of the dialogue, as I was stating before I completely derailed myself right there, Jeff Goldblum, is all of the dialogue is expository dialogue. All of it. Almost all of it. And that's curious because this movie never feels like you ever find out anything about anything. There's no characters in this movie. No one learns anything. No one changes. No one develops. Everyone's just kind of a flat line the entire time. And buildings fall around them. And that's basically all that happens. I feel bad. I honestly feel bad for the actors involved in this because this cast is fantastic. This cast is really great, and they actually get a lot of bit parts with great actors that I love to see in movies. I can't recall their names at this moment, but like Christopher Maloney is in this movie, for example, and I love Christopher Maloney. He's not in enough things, I think. But yeah, everyone is wasted in this movie. It's one of those movies where it feels so, it's just unfocused, and it feels dull, and it has an extreme lack of logic. The characters just seem to decide to do things and decide to not do things on whims, and Superman he takes a long time to actually decide to do anything about Zod, and I'm just like, didn't everyone tell you to protect both your fathers told you to protect people, and you're just kind of like, maybe I should do something about this. I can talk to Amy Adams about it. I can talk to the government. I mean, he is destroying Metropolis right now, but maybe... Alright, let's do something. You know, it's just... There's no reason for the characters to do anything in this movie. You don't learn anything about anyone. Because no one is a fucking character in this movie. No one is... everyone is just... Superman is just, I'm Superman, and I'm sad about it. And Lois Lane is just, I'm Lois Lane, and I'm a reporter and Superman. And Perry White is just, I'm Perry White. And Pa Kent is just confusing, and Uncle Ben in this movie. And it's just, I don't understand what the hell they were doing. Has David S. Goyer read a Superman comic is the question. I don't know. I don't understand how this could happen, because Superman's not hard to fuck up, because he's not. Which is strange, because it's a movie that kind of relies on you having pre-knowledge of this property. And I understand. We have a culture that wants to cut to the chase as quick as possible. I understand, kids. But you have to think, what about the kid, or what about the person who walks in and has no knowledge of any of this? You have to think about that. And the only reason I knew why half of the characters were doing what they were doing was because I have foreknowledge of Superman.
Finally.
for example, Ursa and Non are in this movie, but and Ursa actually has a pretty large part, but I don't even think they name her in this movie, or they name Non. And the only reason I knew that it was Non because it was just this large brute of a guy. And actually, you want to know something odd? The woman who played Ursa was actually doing a very good job as an actress. No one else besides her and Russell Crowe and a couple scenes with Lawrence Fishburne was anyone else putting in any sort of an effort in this movie. It just felt like no one gave a shit. It felt like no one was having fun. It felt like no one wanted to be there. And that sucks because you can feel it as you're watching the movie. And I hate feeling that when I'm watching a movie. I want to watch a movie where I feel like the characters are having fun. And I didn't feel it in this movie. And another really odd, uncomfortable thing is there's a lot of very to the point of being almost offensive imagery that is very similar to 9/11 throughout this entire film. But then there's this coat of sentimentality put all over it with Superman and Lois kissing. And it's just, the entire end of the film just feels incredibly uncomfortable. And it's over long. The entire movie is too long. The entire movie is too dull. You really could have gotten rid of, there's nothing that happens in the middle. It's all just bullshit. It's just a bunch of flashback scenes and a bunch of just jagged editing and very bad structuring and very bad pacing. There's nothing to the middle of this movie that's worth anything.
My father believed that if the world found out who I really was, they'd reject me. He was convinced that the world wasn't ready.
Honestly, at the end of the day, this movie is just kind of a bloated space opera about an alien invasion that happens to have a character named Superman, who never really does anything particularly heroic or particularly impressive. He just kind of, there's this giant doomsday machine at the end, and all he really does is just fly through it.
What do you think?
And he takes care of Zod in a way that it'll piss you off because you realize he could have done that the entire film. And Superman really has cold feet about doing a lot of things in this movie. Why did they already make a suit for him that is different than every other suit from Krypton? I actually liked a lot of the Kryptonian technology in this movie. A lot of the Kryptonian wildlife was interesting too. They had a lot of Kryptonian wildlife. Reminded me a lot of Avatar.
Hey, come on.
But in this movie, Superman just kind of, after he puts on the suit, he just kind of decides to be good for no reason. He doesn't really have a reason, and it just, there's never any convincing reason for any of the characters to really do anything. There is no character, but there's no reason for Lois to really get attached to Superman and love Superman. There's no reason for Superman to really care about humans or to care about Lois, really. There's no reason for anyone to be doing anything. Besides Zod. Zod is the only character with any motivation in this movie. All the other characters are just running around like a bunch of idiots, just doing bullshit for no reason.
What's the S stand for?
It's not an S.
On my world, it means hope.
Well, here it's an S. How about
Excuse me.
This movie sucks. Don't see it. Next week is World War fucking Z. This summer is gonna kill me.